This is the Mid-Morning Talk with Alli.
Osman's Taj Mahal Spice and Rice. For over 80 years, Osman's Taj Mahal have been perfecting the art of the perfect blend of spices, pure, aromatic, and well-seasoned. Spices to tantalize your taste buds. From creative cuisines to gastronomical gourmet goodies. From exotic odors to traditional dishes, Osman's Taj Mahal have remained synonymous with quality spices and condiments. Taj Mahal rice, beans, and lentils. Try our range of chili bite mixes, rose and ilachi syrup, our quick and easy biryani pack, and our traditional range of spice blends. Osman's Taj Mahal. There is no substitute for quality.
This is the Mid-Morning Talk with Alli.
Exactly 12:33. Welcome to the program. On to our final interview for the day. We'll be talking with a clinical psychologist. She is with Akeso Stepping Stones mental health facility. And we're going to talk about surviving domestic abuse and taking back your power. And of course, I've been saying it throughout the show today that we are deep into the 16 days of activism of no violence against women and children. But it shouldn't only be these 16 days that we should be focusing these type of discussions on. We should be talking about these things throughout the year. But we're now joined by Joanne, I'm not sure if she pronounces it as Laskey or Laskey. She is a clinical psychologist and she's going to talk to us about taking back your power. Joanne, good afternoon. Welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, Julie. Yes, you've pronounced my name Laskey. It's lovely to be with you here this afternoon.
Thank you so much for making time available to discuss something that's pretty important to all of us. Now, when we talk about domestic abuse, we're not only talking about a possibly romantic relationship. We're also talking about, it's not only spousal abuse. We're also talking about abuse amongst siblings, maybe. We're talking about abuse with grown children or even younger children to aged parents. I think the list just kind of goes on. And there are various reasons for why the abuse happens. So we'll try and unpack it if time permits, obviously. But let's ask the first and the most important question. Why is it that so very many people find it difficult to walk away from an abusive relationship?
Yes, absolutely, Julie. It's very, very difficult to walk away from an abusive relationship because abuse by its very nature undermines our confidence. And we often feel when we are abused, overwhelmed and unable to cope. Often abuse starts with a lot of emotional abuse. So there's a critical voice coming in at us all the time. And one would feel very undermined. And abusers often justify their abuse. So they would give reasons.
For example?
I hit you because you were cheeky. Or, yes, so things like that. Or
so it's your fault.
Pushed you.
It's your fault. It's not.
You triggered me.
Right,
yes, it's
right.
your fault. Yes. And often in abusive relationships, before any physical abuse starts, often the kind of subtle undermining starts slowly. And over time, the person loses more and more confidence until they almost believe the justification of the abuse. So it's very tricky to even know when you are being abused. Yeah.
There are a lot of situations where abuse happens, or in most situations where abuse does happen, just to keep the peace. For example, if the husband has beat up on the wife, loses his temper and starts beating up on her. Later on, he's very remorseful and apologizes, but then says things like this: it's your fault because you triggered me. You know just how to push my buttons. How do you respond? Because if you do kind of defend yourself and say, no, but that's not the situation, you have a very bad temper, or you're an alcoholic, or you're an addict, or you're just a person with an exceptionally horrid disposition and you feel powerful in a situation like this, you very well can't tell your abuser that, because he's going to start beating up on you all over again.
Absolutely, yes. And also, as soon as you start to justify yourself, you are in a way undermining yourself. So as soon as you've got to give reasons, defend yourself, you're actually saying, well, I'm not so sure whether your abuse is wrong. And so that just adds fuel to the abuse, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if can you reason with your abuser? I think that's the question I'm asking, is because if you try, if you call him out and say, no, but the situation was not like that, you're just going to anger him and push him over the edge, and the abuse is going to start all over again.
Absolutely. That's why I often say to people that are in abusive situations, you've actually got to take responsibility within yourself. You can't wait for another person to change. You can't try and change your abuser. You have to make sure you get yourself into the right place. And the first step towards doing that is recognizing that you can't change the other person. I think a lot of people hold on to relationships for years and years and years, hoping that something is going to change.
So, Joanne, if I am in an abusive relationship, and I've heard this over and over again, be the change you want to see happening around you. So I've got to change. What is it that I've got to do in that relationship, because I don't want to lose the relationship? What is it that I do, and how is my change going to impact on my abuser, be it my husband or whatever?
Yeah, so that's very tough, because sometimes being the change means accepting that I cannot change another person. So, but what I can do is put up my own boundaries. But there are times once you've tried putting up boundaries for a period of time that you have to realize that nothing is going to change. Not everything is fixable. That's when you need to make other plans.
Okay, so that's either that you remain in that abusive relationship for the rest of your life, or you walk away. Or either one of you are going to get killed in the process. That's the sad reality.
Absolutely. Yes.
What are some of the common themes you have identified in your work with survivors of domestic abuse?
So I work in a DDU, an addiction/psychiatric unit. So a lot of the time, the people that I deal with have addictions. So they come in to the clinic to deal with an addiction. A lot of the time, they've used that substance as a way to cope with a potentially abusive relationship. So they, instead of dealing with the problem, they turn to alcohol or drugs or other habits that maybe are self-destructive. And so what happens then is they just stay in that situation and numb their feelings. So that is one of the big themes that comes through. On the other side, often a family member is an addict. And so they are a lovely person when they are sober, but when they become drunk, they become abusive, for example. And that often confuses the family, because here they're dealing with a lovely person who becomes somebody quite different. And I think during COVID, we've also realized just how much a bigger role things like substances and alcohol play in terms of domestic violence. Because when alcohol was banned, we saw a dramatic decrease in domestic violence cases during that time. So that is, substances is a huge theme with domestic abuse. So that is one of the things. The other theme that comes through very strongly is blaming yourself. So often people who have been abused often blame themselves for what is going on. And so it's very hard for them to even know that they are being abused.
Mm, mm,
And they try and figure out who's right. Am I right? Am I wrong? Who's right? Who's wrong? Because often in domestic situations, relationships are very close. And so the lines are very blurred and muddy. And it's very much a case of a subjective guessing as to what's going on. And so, yeah.
I should imagine in a domestic abuse situation, there are other people involved. You may have your siblings or possibly, you know, if the abuse is happening, you know, if the husband's abusing on the wife and you have teenage children or older children, that always, possibly not always, but invariably would come to rescue the abused party. And sometimes also because they feel so helpless and hopeless in the situation, would kind of, and just to calm down the abuser, kind of also, even though they come in to break up the fight and try and rescue the person, would also blame the abused person. But it's your fault. Why do you push his buttons?
That's absolutely right. Yes. It becomes very hard to know that you are actually being abused. And the other thing is that sometimes it's easier to know if you've been physically abused than emotionally abused, because emotional abuse can be very subtle and very even a lot more damaging than physical abuse, because often it's hard to know it's happening and it's hard to know how to recover from it. Yeah, because people don't know, am I being abused or am I just inferior? Am I just worthless as a person? So often people say, well, should I leave? But maybe I'm wrong. It's that whole thing of shame. And as a result of that, people don't leave. And what I often say to people is, it's not about being right or wrong. If a situation is not good for you as a person, then that is something that you need to consider moving on. It's not about establishing who's right, who's wrong, what's happening. It's about considering your safety, your well-being.
And I guess there's, you know, when you give advice to someone who's in an abusive home right now, they have to weigh up a lot of options. If I walk away, I want to walk away because I've had enough of this abuse. What do I stand to lose? So I think those are the type of conversations they're having with themselves as well.
Absolutely. Like often it's, well, I don't want to break up the family. What about the children? We have to keep the family together at all costs because that's what I believe in. That's what's good for the children. And so these are all the considerations that go through somebody's head who's been abused. And often they stay just because they need to keep the family together. And there's a great sense of loss in terms of breaking up a family. And they're scared that, okay, if I leave my husband or I leave my wife, I'm going to hurt the children. And then there's a lot of guilt and shame with that.
What practical steps can you recommend for someone in that situation right now?
Okay, so the first thing I would say is ask for help. Because often when you're being abused, it's very hard to tell what's really going on for you. Because you've had lots of people undermining your beliefs, your thinking, your emotions. So it's hard to actually know what's the way forward. So get help. Get advice, identify your support. So there's lots of different types of support. You can get support from family or friends. You can get support from a religious organization that you might be involved in, like the mosque or the church. Then our police stations, a lot of them have support. There are child and family units that specialize in domestic violence and abuse. And often the police stations have trauma counselors on the scene. Or if you have the means, you can consult a therapist or a counselor, a psychologist, somebody like that. And also, one of the other options is to actually admit yourself into a psychiatric unit to get a break from the situation, to have a chance to talk about things in a safe place away from the situation so that you can understand what's going on and with the help of a team, make plans for your way forward.
When you
So,
carry
yes.
on, no, carry on.
Yeah, so often people want to try and heal themselves while they're in the situation of abuse. You can't heal when you're in a vulnerable position, when you're not in a safe place. So your first priority must be getting to a place of safety. And during that time, it's important to take responsibility. Don't wait for the other person to change, like I said. It's not your fault, but the only way out is by taking responsibility. So, it's not the time for grieving. It's not the time for mourning. It's not the time for self-pity. That will just slow down the process of you getting free. What you do need to do is build up your self-esteem, see a therapist, ask for help, and try and formulate a plan to leave, if that's what's needed.
So what would be the next steps for a survivor who has left an abusive home? It must be a very scary place. Doesn't matter how bad the abuse must have been. It's, I think, even scarier outside in the big, bad, wide open world.
Absolutely, because what we often do as people is we internalize our biggest critic. So whoever's been abusing us previously, we now take on that voice and we start telling ourselves the same things that those who've abused us or critiqued us have said. And so sometimes when people leave an abusive home, there's a deep sense of doom, like I will fail. Those kind of emotions come up. And so it's very important to deal then with the emotions, to tell your story, preferably with a therapist or a counselor, a psychologist, and to begin to retell your story in a way that empowers you so that you're not the victim. And then to grieve. That is the time where you can grieve, where you can feel those emotions and deal with that. But the other side of that is that people have often tell me here at Stepping Stones that I've done the grieving, I've done all these things. Why do I keep landing myself in abusive situations? Why do I keep being mistreated? Why do all of these things come up? It's because a lot of people deal with the emotion and they forgive their abuser. But when we've been abused as people, we tend to take on certain behavior patterns. So we start to do things as a way to cope. For example, we might push people away, not be as trusting. We may avoid taking risks. We may avoid relationships. We may be overly sensitive. And all of these things have a knock-on effect. We may not be as sure of ourselves and not have good enough boundaries. And so what happens if you, for example, don't have good enough boundaries, people walk all over you. And so the abuse is repeated over and over again. So part of healing, really healing, is learning to recognize what is my behavior that has come out as a result of being abused, and how do I change that so that I can reintegrate myself back into life as a fully functioning person. Yeah.
I'm wondering about when you leave an abusive relationship or kick the abuser out of the house, and you become very assertive about the fact that this is my space. Why should I go through a whole, why should I inconvenience myself when you are the disruptor in this relationship? So you kick the person out, but feel very guilty about it. How's that going to impact, this horrible feeling of guilt and worrying and wondering where the abuser is, whether he's an addict or an alcoholic or whatever, that he's probably lying in the gutter somewhere or he's cold and hungry. Let's look at that scenario, because they can emotionally blackmail you into taking them back in.
Absolutely. And if you were to, you would be what we call an enabler. So you would actually, what I always say is what's good for you is ultimately what's good for the other person. So sometimes tough love is needed. Sometimes we have to say no to help a person. If we keep saying yes, then we just enable them to carry on with their behavior. And that behavior is also not good for that person. It's not good for their self-esteem. It's not good for their well-being. So saying no and putting up a strong boundary is the best thing that one can do to help both yourself and the other person.
God forbid if you find yourself in a situation like that. So you kick your abuser out or you leave. Yeah. And he then he just goes, over the edge, so to speak. And you kind of beat up on yourself for the rest of your life. If I didn't do that, if I hadn't kicked him out, or if I hadn't left home, this would not have happened. So that's the one issue. And what about after that one abusive relationship, terribly abusive relationship? Is it possible to build trust with another person and hopefully find love again?
Absolutely. It is absolutely possible. One shouldn't, however, rush into another relationship straight away. Because often if you haven't healed those behavior patterns, like for instance, not being able to put in place proper boundaries, if you haven't healed that, so not just emotionally, but also the patterns, then you could be setting yourself up for a repeat of an abusive situation. So it's very important to actually do your healing work, see a therapist, talk it through, and take your time before you find another partner. Often it's better just to settle for a lot of friends at first, test yourself with just normal friendship, and see how you are with your boundaries and with relating to those people. And then later, when you're ready, maybe start dating.
I'm wondering, when you come out of an abusive relationship as the abuser or the victim, both of you are carrying a lot of baggage. To let go of that baggage, pardon, is not easy. The best way I should imagine is to go into therapy, is it not?
Absolutely, yes. Therapy is so important, because what we always say here at Stepping Stones is your best thinking got you here. So you landed up needing help because your pattern of thinking that you're so used to, that is so essential to you, has got you in trouble. So it's very helpful to have a therapist to talk to who can mirror back what you're saying. So yes, absolutely. It's very important.
Okay, we've almost come to the end of the interview. What are the important pointers would you like to leave our listeners with this morning, as far as perhaps getting out of an abusive relationship or creating the change? If you go into therapy and go back into that relationship, what are the chances that, your behavior has changed so much that the abuser is going to take note of that and he starts changing as well? He starts treating you with respect. Is that a possibility?
That is absolutely a possibility. So what we get at Stepping Stones, a lot of people that struggle with codependence. So they are overly caring, overly giving, and have poor boundaries, and often feel abused by their partners. And in those cases, when those people learn to put in place their boundaries, the other person has to shift. So in those cases, it's absolutely, there is a very good chance of change. But what we always say to people about boundaries here is that don't go from 0 to hero.
I was about to ask you if the boundaries are too harsh, like you said,
Yes.
from won't that create an even bigger problem?
Absolutely. So in true codependent style, people hear about boundaries and they go from being the local doormat to a castle with a moat and a fighting dragon.
Right. Yeah.
And they shock the living daylights out of their family. Everybody's shocked. Who is this person now? And because they haven't developed the boundary muscle to maintain those boundaries, it lasts about a week and it all comes crumbling down. So what I say to people, putting up boundaries is a little bit like weightlifting. When you go to the gym, you don't go to the biggest weights and pick up 150 kilograms. You will squash yourself. You go to the little section with the pink and blue weights, you pick up those weights and you lift those little 1 or 2 kilogram weights until you're a little stronger. Then you go for the bigger one. The same with boundaries. You practice putting in place boundaries with 1 or 2 things. And when that is automatic and natural, you can introduce other boundaries. That way, you develop the muscle and the strength to keep it up. And you don't shock the living daylights out of your friends and family.
So small steps at a time.
Small steps. Yes.
Okay,
Absolutely.
we've come to the end of the interview. Where can people find out more about Akeso Mental Health Facilities and the services you provide?
So you can go to our website. It is www.akeso, that's akeso.co.za. So that's www.akeso.co.za.
And my final question to you, Joanne, can you truly take back your life? Can you truly become whole again, both the abuser and the victim, with the right help put in place, with the right therapy? Can you truly reclaim your life?
Absolutely. Sometimes it takes a crisis for us to actually truly live. So sometimes a crisis can force us to get help, which can then make us aware of ourselves, of our lives, of what we want, and actually can lead to a more positive, more fulfilled life.
Lovely.
So,
yep.
Yes.
Lovely talking to you. And let's end on that note of hope. And please, God, let the abuse stop. Let us all take note of the 16 days of violence. Let's heal ourselves. Let's heal our families and our communities. Let's heal the world. Thank you for your time and God bless.
God bless you. Thank you.
Time for me to wrap up. Thank you indeed for being with me. Truly hope you've enjoyed the interviews as much as I've enjoyed your company. Till the next time, take care on the road.